Shavua Tov, Parashat Khukat. When a person has a lot of stress and tension in their life, the solution, the temporary solution, may be very close by, but do not allow that solution to become a temple. What am I talking about? Let's take a look at one story in this week's Parsha to gain a understanding about just how it is we should view the physical, material world in which we live. The story goes that the Israelites, after having eaten the divine manna for 40 years, are tired of it. Now they start once again doing what Jews do, complaining about the menu. And we want to eat this, we want to eat that, we're tired of this crackery, light manna. It's not enough, it's not satisfying, blah, blah, blah. God gets upset and he sends snakes to bite the people. And now the people are frightened by those snakes and they come to Moses and they say, we've sinned. So God tells Moses, here is how you solve the problem. Make a copper image of a snake, put it up high on a pole, and whoever was bitten should look at that copper snake and they will be healed and they will live. We need to understand exactly what this is about. Seems almost like a form of an idol to make a sculpture of a copper snake, and that's going to heal? The rabbis are bothered by this, and they say that it's not the snake that heals at all, but rather the fact that it's high up on the pole, causing the people to look heavenward, and when they look heavenward, they remember God, they humble their hearts, and that is what will heal them. It is similar to the story of the battle with Amalek, which happened to the Israelites shortly after they left Egypt, that Moses went up on the hill, and when he raised his hands, the Israelites triumphed, and when he lowered his hands, the Amalekites would be in the ascendancy. And the rabbis say it's not the hands of Moses that caused victory or defeat, but rather when they looked up at Moses' hands, when they were raised on high, they saw heaven, they subjugated their hearts, and therefore they were saved. So the question is, then what difference does it make if it's a copper snake on the pole, or if it's a bright red picture of a pizza pie? Maybe that would be the solution. Anything that gets their attention, gets them to look up towards heaven, should be able to do it. Why specifically a snake? The same thing that was biting them. Coincidence? I think not. And finally, how does this connect to the commandment of the red cow, which was the form of purification for those who had come in contact with the dead, a perfect red cow that had never done any work, never bore a yoke, that didn't have a single non-red hair, would be burnt, and the ashes would be mixed with some herbs, and the mixture would then be used to purify someone who became impure from the dead. This is the famous Parah Duma, the red heifer. What do the stories in the Parsha afterwards have to do with that commandment which begins the Parsha? Why is it there? So let's take a look at the snakes that attacked the Israelites when they were dissatisfied with the divine manna. Why were they dissatisfied? Well, there's an explanation, a simple one. Until now, they'd been wandering in the desert, so the divine food from God was perfect for them. But now they've come to settled land, and they see the people there eating and drinking and being merry, and they see real food, and all of a sudden they want it. So that may be the trigger that got them going. But let's take a look deeper, because when we see snakes, well, we immediately think of the first snake, the one who convinced Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What was the story with that snake? What did he represent? And why is what he represented relevant to this week's story? I teach a bar mitzvah student, and he once asked a very nice question. His parsha is going to be Bereshit, Genesis, which is including this story. And the Torah says, first of all, that man was a nefesh chaya, a living soul. The famous Onkelos translates it as being a speaking spirit. And so my student asked, well, it's not just the human that was the speaking spirit. The snake also spoke. The snake told Eve that she should try the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so what's the difference between the snake speaking and the human speaking? And so I answered that the human speaking is speaking from a place of spirituality. Humans are capable of speech that animals are not capable of. They are capable of subject matters that have nothing to do with day-to-day existence. They can talk about philosophy, about history, about astronomy, about theology, about all kinds of abstract concepts, and they enjoy it. They love these conversations. However, a snake may be just a more sophisticated form, at least back in those days, of a parrot. Now, a parrot says, "Polly want a cracker." But even if you can teach a parrot to say more sophisticated things, which you can teach the parrot to say, "I am not an anti-disestablishmentarianist." You can teach a parrot to say that, and the parrot will make those sounds. But in parrot language, that is exactly the same as "Polly want a cracker." In other words, the animal can be trained to do many, many things if it thinks that it's going to get food in reward. Period. Everything the animal says is basically, "Feed me," in more or less sophisticated language. And the Torah is therefore saying us that when the snake was more sophisticated than all of the other animals, it meant that the snake was even capable of giving logical arguments in order to convince Eve that she should eat from the tree. But ultimately, what the snake was saying was, these sounds, this argument that I'm giving to Eve is going to give me what I lust after. And indeed, the rabbis say something very strange, that the snake was lusting after Eve. He wanted to somehow get Adam to be killed because of this sin, and then he, the snake, would marry Eve. So the snake is giving lust. And indeed, the Torah says that when Eve contemplated the tree after the snake had spoken to her, she realized that the tree was, in Hebrew, ta'avahi la'einayim, a lustful thing to the eyes. In other words, the snake represents lust, the desire for physical pleasures, eating and otherwise. That is the snake. So it could be that the Israelites, in their desire to eat delicacies that they hadn't known since the manna had started falling, were beginning to fall prey to the desire to fulfill their physical lusts. In this case, it was food. And that's a slippery slope. Now you may ask, why is it that when they desired to change the menu in the parasha of Beha'alotecha, which we read a few weeks ago, but it took place historically 40 years before, God punished them in other ways. He didn't send snakes for them. Why not then? Because there, one could say that their desire for food other than the manna was not a adoption of a lust-based lifestyle. It wasn't seeing life as the pursuit of pleasure. But there they felt genuine stress and tension. They were not sure that God would protect them, and they knew they were supposed to go to the Holy Land soon. And this fear ultimately manifested itself in the episode of the 10 evil spies. So there, they had other concerns, and well, when you have stress and tension, the solution is the refrigerator. People eat as a distraction. People indulge in physical pleasure as a distraction from an emotional distress. So it was a different form of a sin. But in this generation, where they wanted the food now, after 40 years, they were turning the refrigerator into the temple. In other words, the refrigerator became the goal. The pursuit of pleasure as life's main goal became theirs, and this was what God needed to stop by sending the snake. Let's think about the mitzvah of the red heifer for a moment, because the red heifer directly addresses this mindset. Rashi, the famous Rashi at the beginning, says that the Satan and the nations of the earth were mocking Israel about this commandment of the red heifer, saying, "What reason is there for it?" That's a strange combination. The Satan, which is basically synonymous with the evil inclination, and the nations of the world. They get together. And which nations of the world? And when did they ever come and mock the commandment of the red heifer? I've heard of non-Jews making fun of some of the commandments that the Jews keep, but not the red heifer. That's never been part of the comedy routine. So why are they mocking that particular commandment? But rather, as we have explained previously, they weren't mocking the commandment of the red heifer per se. They were mocking the whole idea of why bother doing it. And we can explain that the red heifer, why red? Red in Hebrew is Edom. And we have Edom in this week's Parsha too. There's a nation called Edom, and they are the descendants of Esav, Jacob's brother, his older brother by a few seconds. Why is Esav called Edom? Well, Esav believed that if a person is completely righteous, they will live forever. God won't take a tzaddik out of the world. And then he was traumatized when his grandfather Abraham, who in his eyes was the greatest tzaddik possible, died. And indeed, Jacob was making the condolence meal, a soup, a lentil soup. And Esav comes and he sees the lentil soup and he says, give me some of this red stuff, ha'adom, ha'adom, hazeh. And that's why his name is Edom, which means red. Jacob says, sell me your birthright. And Esav says the fateful sentence, behold, I am going to die. In other words, no matter how righteous I'm trying to be, no matter how I want to fulfill that birthright, it's not going to help. I am immortal and I'm not going to be here forever. If that's the case, I don't need it. I'm going to die. Why bother with the birthright? Why bother with the future? Why bother with the tradition of Abraham and my father Isaac? Why bother with faith? Why bother with morality? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The purpose of life is to enjoy it. The purpose of life is to get as much pleasure as you possibly can. And that is the ethos of Esav, of Edom. And therefore the parah adumah, the red cow, which symbolizes the pursuit of lust. A cow is a big animal. In the ancient world, it was the most valuable animal. It eats, and this is a cow that never bore a yoke, never worked. Its entire existence is to eat. And it's of great value. It's perfectly red. So what do we do with this symbol of consumption, of giving oneself pleasure through eating and through physical things? We burn it and turn it into ash, because this is the message of the red heifer, that the purpose, the one who lives a life of pursuit of pleasure, ends up with ashes and dust. And the snake, the serpent, who represents this pursuit of lust, what is his curse? He's going to crawl on the earth, and that's what he's going to eat. In other words, he may eat the most delicious delicacies the world ever saw, but they will be to him as dirt and dust. The rabbis say that Ein Adam met v'chatzita avato biados. Nobody finishes their life with even half of the things they lust for. When Jacob is to meet Esav as he returns from Laban, so he sends him a tremendous gift which Esav refuses to accept, and he says to Jacob, he says, my brother, you shall keep which is yours, ki yeshli rav, I have a lot. And Jacob insists, no, take the gift, because I have kol, I have everything. You see, Esav cannot say I have everything, because Esav is living a life of pursuit of pleasure, and therefore he will never be satisfied. And no matter what he has, it will turn to dust in his mouth. But Jacob, who pursues a life of meaning, for him, he has a feeling that he has everything. Now, lest one think that pursuit of physical pleasure, that physical pleasure and physical things are inherently bad, that is not the case. It is all in the goal. I believe statistics have shown that even though religious Jews per capita drink far more wine than the general population, there is much less alcoholism among that population. Why so? Well, the Jew drinks far more wine in the context of Kiddush, Friday night, Shabbos morning, and then Havdalah, and on holidays, Passover, 4 cups. And every time the Jew drinks wine, it is part of a sanctification of some sort. So the wine is never the ends, it is the means. We drink the wine in order to achieve holiness, and therefore it does not become a vice in and of its own right. But for those who wine becomes an escape, becomes a goal, the pleasure of being drunk, the enjoyment of drinking, well, then it's harder to control, and that's when alcoholism has a foothold. So it depends on how you use it. And I think that this is the significance of taking this very same snake, which represents lust, which is what the Israelites were slipping into, a mindset of life's purpose is to eat, drink, and be merry, the snake which comes to bite them, to remind them to think, wait a second, think about the snake in Genesis. That snake pursued lust and ended up eating dirt and dust for its entire existence. Rather, what is the place of all of these physical things that give us pleasure? We are not meant to be ascetics. We are not meant to torture ourselves. But we are meant to sanctify that which we do have. put this snake up on a pole, a copper snake up on a pole, and people look towards heaven. It's not the looking towards heaven per se that makes them repent. It's the realization that what the snake represents, the blessings of this physical world, when they are elevated to the level of Kedusha, of holiness, of Kiddush, of sanctification, then they gain tremendous value and meaning. You could say the same thing about Moses' hands in the battle with Amalek. It wasn't that Moses' hands being high caused the victory because they're looking at the sky, but rather there are two reasons why a person could fight a war. One is a base reason, because of hatred, because of lust for territorial conquest. That would be the hands down towards the earth, for earthly reasons. But when the hands are raised up on high, to defend your people, to ensure a future for the Torah and for the morality of God in the world, and defeat the Amalekites who have such baseless and burning hatred. When you raise your hands on high, Moses, we realize that the hands of war, when done with a sense of sanctification, will be victorious and have tremendous value. So the lesson is to take everything, all of the blessings we have in our lives, and not to reject them, but to sanctify them. We don't work in order to eat. We eat in order to work, in order to make our contribution to the world. Shavua Tov.